One of the biggest moments of your life has come. You've given birth to a beautiful baby. When a baby is born, one is expected to feel deep joy and love. But what if you also feel confusion, or trauma, or a lack of self-worth? What if it affects your relationships with your loved ones? How does one begin to move forward to resolve this emotional and sometimes physical conflict? I'm Nicole Morales, mother, doula, midwife, and Birthing from Within mentor, here to help walk us through ways one may heal after a traumatic birth. This is Parent Savers, Episode 11.
Faster than a speeding toddler.
Sit still for just a minute.
Can soothe boo-boos with a gentle kiss.
Would you get down from there?
Able to clean poopy bottoms in a single swipe.
Oh, what did you eat?
Turning frazzled mommies and daddies into procreators of peace and harmony.
Ah, quit touching me.
It's Parent Savers, empowering new parents everywhere.
Welcome to Parent Savers, broadcasting from the Birth Education Center of San Diego. I'm your host, Casey Wilt. Parent Savers is all about helping new parents preserve their sanity by getting you expert advice from the baby years through the toddler years. Feel free to send us emails or suggestions on our website, parentsavers.com, or our Facebook page. And you can also call the Parent Savers hotline at 619-866-4775. I'm a new parent myself. My son Carson just turned 19 months this last week, and I'm joined by 3 new parents in the studio.
My name is Kyla Pence. I'm 31. I have a son who is 14 months old, and I am an office manager for a heart surgeon.
Great.
Hi, I'm Esther Altman. I am 27. I have a daughter who is turning 2.5 in August, and I'm expecting another baby at the end of September, and I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Hi, my name is Sarah Overby. I have twins who are 2.5. I have a boy and a girl, and I work for a software company in marketing.
Awesome. Love to have you guys here. Thanks. Today we are discussing in our headlines from The Atlantic. A friend of mine sent me this on a Facebook page. The headline is, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. And the picture in the front has a little baby girl in a briefcase. And it basically talks about, this actually woman was pretty high up in Washington, D.C. and stuff. She's basically leading talks and, get graduation speeches and things like that. And a young women have asked her, how do you juggle family? How do you juggle your work? How do you juggle your husband? All this other stuff. And she's come to the conclusion that you can't have it all. And some people disagree with that because the whole basis of other women in government and in high positions, they believe you can't have it all. You can do this, all the liberation of women. What do you guys think? Can we have it all?
I think that it's difficult to have a full-time career and be the mother, the parent, the wife that you would like to be. It's very time-consuming. And it's hard to give all of your attention to all of those things.
Oh, yeah. When it says in the first page, it says, we can't manage to rise up the ladder as fast as men and have a family and an active home life and be thin and beautiful, Something's going to give.
I think that so much depends on the husband or the partner and the support system that you have, maybe having family around. So how much you can have, how much you can give, what you can do, it just depends on each person's surrounding and who they have as their core support system. I've lived away from my family. It was much harder to have the job and career. And now that I'm back in San Diego and living around my family's support system again, it's easier. I can spend more time with my kids or, putting time into my job. So it just depends.
Well, I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And that was a choice that my husband and I made together, primarily because I realized that I couldn't take care of my daughter the way that I wanted to while also having a full-time job. Mm-hmm. What I found interesting in her article, and she mentions it more towards the end, is the idea that we can't have it all in the world that we live in today in terms of what professional commitments are expected of us. However, if we were to make it more of a women-friendly, mother-friendly, professional environment, we could do it.
Yeah.
And it would be better for men and for women because men want to be home with their children. My husband works from 8 in the morning till 7:30, 8 at night. Mm-hmm. And our daughter goes to bed at 10 and 11 because of it. He needs to spend time with his kid. But it's not fair for him to have to work so many hours and evenings at home and the weekend. But that's the trade-off we made, because in this culture of you have to work all the time if you want to make any money, we both couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But it's really sad. If we were to change it and make it a country where we cared about family, I think women and men could work and also have time with their family and have that balance.
There's a lot of countries in Europe and stuff. I know Sweden's really family friendly, and I wonder, it's just one of those things that, you know, sometimes I want to pick up and move to like Europe and find a country that like appreciates me being a mother and my and my husband being a father. And I guess the article's right that we can't have it all, huh?
Not right now.
Not right now. Well, great. Thanks for talking. We'll post this on our Pinterest board, and you guys can read the full research page itself, because it's more than a 3-page article. It's very deep and in-depth, and it was a good read, though, so you can check it out and read a little bit more. I'll end with, she ends the whole thing, she said, we can help all Americans have healthy, happy, productive lives, valuing the people they love as much as the success they seek. Put that on our dream board one day. Today on Parent Savers, we have Nicole Morales, birth educator of Birthing from Within, here with us to talk and walk us through how to live our life after a traumatic birth. So I haven't explained my birth on this show, but it's out there in cyberspace somewhere. But my birth, I'm just going to give a quick overview of it. So I labored for a very long time, over 20 hours. In the last 5 hours, I pushed for 5 hours. And I was at a birthing center, so I didn't have medication. And pushing for 5 hours is very hard. It messes you up for the next 4 months. You can't really do a lot of things. And then my son was born not breathing, and he had to go be rushed off in an ambulance to the NICU, where he spent his first week. And, of course, after pushing for 5 hours, you can't sit. But what do you do at the NICU? You sit for a long period of time. So there's a lot of feelings build up, and actually that's how I met Nicole. Someone sought me out to her, and she helped actually walk through the birth with my husband and I, because stuff like that, it's just hard to get over. But anyways, I know in this format we don't have a lot of time to go into depth about our birth story, but I know there's women out there who've experienced all gamuts, and so we wanted to let you know that, you know, we can relate to you. So we're going to kind of share a little bit about each of our stories, just so that you know that there are people out there that have had experiences, so that we can all add to the conversation and know that we've had experiences. So anyways, I'll let you go.
Okay, so I had planned for months to have as natural a birth as possible at the hospital. I didn't want to have any medication. I wanted to, labor through taking showers, walking around, doing whatever I needed to do to get through the labor without using medication. And unfortunately, I had really high blood pressure, and so they were concerned about me getting preeclampsia. So they had me hooked up to monitors, so I wasn't allowed to go more than 2 feet away from the bed. And so I could actually utilize the ball, but that was basically all I could do. And then after a while, they were more concerned, so I couldn't even leave the bed. They had to put a monitor inside to monitor the baby as well, because they were having trouble hearing the heartbeat. So partway through, I was fine. I felt normal. I didn't even have any pain at all. And then out of nowhere, I was in excruciating pain. So I asked them, how far along I was, how dilated I was, because I really didn't want to have medication. And instead of checking me, they just said, oh, you're maybe 5 centimeters dilated. You're not having this baby until tomorrow afternoon. There's no way that you'll have this baby until tomorrow afternoon. And so I thought, well, there's no way that I can survive until tomorrow afternoon in this pain. There's just absolutely no way. So my husband ordered the epidural for me. I had the epidural. The doctor comes in and she said, you're almost dilated 10. You're about ready to have this baby. So I was so frustrated, disappointed, angry, all the above, because, I could have made it if I was already at almost 10, and I knew that would be a whole nother story. So then she leaves. She says, I'll be back, and she leaves me in there for over 2 hours waiting for her when I was dilated 10. I could have had the baby, been pushing, whatever. She left because apparently they were busy and she had other people to go see. And since I had the epidural, I guess that it made it easier for her to just leave me, because she knew that I could just hang out. So I was stuck in the bed, and to top it off, the epidural didn't work completely, so only half of my body was numb, but the other half I could still feel, the contractions. And then once she came back, she said, "Oh, are you ready to have this baby?" I said, "Yeah, I've been ready for quite a while now." And I only pushed maybe 4 times, and he came right out, so that was great, but it was just frustrating that my experience was so dragged on. And then just to kind of also, the umbilical cord was a little bit in the way, so I had to have an episiotomy, which I also didn't want to have. I don't think anyone wants to have that. Yeah. But so that was also something that wasn't in my plan or my idea for my birth. So,
Sarah?
Well, my husband and I planned on having one child, and walked around when I got pregnant saying, we're just going to have one. And then at the first ultrasound discovered it was twins. So that plan kind of went out the window, thank goodness. And I basically went into sort of a labor with contractions at 23 weeks, got put on bed rest, and then had my daughter, her placenta abrupted. And so I gave birth to them at 27 weeks, 5 days. And it was an emergency C-section that was, there was severe bleeding. I had to sign up for a blood transfusion to save my life. And meanwhile, they're pulling the babies out of me, and they can't find their heartbeats. And it was just a very difficult, overwhelming experience. And I remember when they kind of lifted up my daughter to show me, your whole life, when you think of having kids, you imagine holding a baby and having a moment. And mine got whisked off to another hospital, and so I was at the hospital recovering from a C-section, and, loss of blood and all that stuff, was really weak, low blood pressure. And my husband had to leave the next day to continue with Fire Academy that he was doing. And so I was kind of alone and didn't have my kids with me. And so I didn't get to even see them or really hold them for 3 days after I gave birth to them. And then my daughter had some issues, so I had to wait a little while to hold her. But they're healthy now. And but the whole experience, I would never want to go through again.
Gosh,
but I'm just
the waterworks are starting.
But that's basically my birth story.
Thanks for sharing, Esther.
My water broke, and I had no contractions, and I refused to really educate myself prior to the birth experience because I was petrified at the idea of massive amounts of pain that overwhelm you. And and I asked my mom, well, what was your birth experience like? She's like, I don't know you. She's Russian. You go to the hospital, you get the epidural, baby comes out. It's all good.
That's a great accent.
So, that's my mom's way of explaining it to me. And I was really scared, so I didn't want to deal with the whole thing. So we went to the hospital, and right away they put me on Pitocin. And I knew I really didn't need it, and I told the doctor I wasn't interested in it, and she said, okay, fine, go walk around for 4 hours, waste your time walking around, and then you can come back and get your Pitocin. It's your choice, whatever you want. And at that point, I'm like, well, the doctor probably knows best, so okay, I'll get the Pitocin. And then about 7 hours into it, it became extremely painful for me, and they gave me an epidural, and that's when everything became really scary, because I'm having massive contractions from the Pitocin. I'm bent over. There's this needle going into my back, and that's already really scary. And the doctor goes, oh, that's not good. And I'm like, what?
Words you never want to hear.
Never want to hear. Because I've heard of people, being paralyzed or having lifelong issues from an epidural. So it's like, okay, what does that mean? He goes, oh, you just bled a little. It's okay, I'll do it again. So he did it again, and I started getting numb up to my shoulders almost. And about 5 minutes after that epidural and after he left, I started to pass out because I guess I have low blood pressure as it is, and they weren't prepared for it, and I started to pass out. And then everyone's running in and trying to fill me with saline and ephedrine and whatever. So it started a whole line of mistakes made by this beginning nurse that I had on the night shift, and she was constantly freaking out and running in and telling me she couldn't find the baby's heart rate, and so it was really scary the whole night. I just couldn't sleep. I hadn't eaten, and so the birth goes for about 24 hours, and about 10 hours into that epidural, I ended up not having any pain management anymore, so I had the full experience of the Pitocin without any epidural, and so they gave me an epidural again. And I, again, started to pass out, and again, the whole saline and everything. And then after about 24 hours, where I was already screaming, like the last 4 or 5 because of the Pitocin pain, the doctor comes in and he's like, look, you're only 7 centimeters. She hasn't dropped at all. I think it's time for an emergency C-section. And at that point, I'm like, you can kill me. I don't really care. This is a horrible agony. Yeah. Whatever you want. I don't care. 5 minutes, he's like, okay, in about 45 minutes, we'll do the C-section. And then about 5 minutes later, for the 10th time or 20th time, I don't even know, I had 5 nurses running in there going, we can't find her heart rate, we can't find her heart rate, and just transferring me onto another table and going in for the emergency C-section. And then my husband is getting ready in scrubs, and as I'm laying there on the table, we realize that epidural is not going to work for the C-section. And at that point, they're like, we're going to have to put you under. And so I just remember holding on to the doctor's hand and just crying and being like, am I going to make it through all of this? Is the baby going to make it? And he actually was really kind. He's like, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And he held my hand until I fell asleep. And then I woke up and I was in this room healing with all these other patients who had other surgeries who didn't actually have C-sections. And I remember going, where's my husband? Where's my husband? And the nurse going, he's fine. He has your baby. And I kept on asking where he was. And she said, if you don't be quiet, you're not going to see him. Oh my gosh. I really remember that. It was.
I'll put you in a timeout. I mean, almost like.
And I was a little bit like delusional. Like, where's my husband? What's going on? She's like, you be quiet, or you're gonna have to wait longer. So at that point, I was quiet, and the healing process after the whole thing was really hard for me. Nursing was really hard. Having an emergency C-section, and thankfully my baby was fine and she was totally healthy, and that was a huge relief for me. But it was a very stressful experience to not sleep for 24 hours because the nurses were constantly running in and freaking me out. And then you don't eat, right? You can't eat when you're in the hospital for 24 hours. And after C-section, I think you don't eat for another 12 to 20 hours or drink anything. So by the time everything was kind of over, I didn't want to eat or drink. My husband had to force me to be interested in the physical things again because it's just, you go through so much fear and pain, you almost shut down. At least I did. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you, ladies, all of you guys, for sharing your stories. It touched me. So
the stories are very deep, and there's a lot inside every one of them. And I really want to acknowledge that because we're probably not going to deal with that today. We're not going to really have the time for all of us to sit down and talk about all those different moments that you do carry with you after such an experience. So thank you guys for sharing them.
Today on Parent Savers, we have Nicole Morales, and she's helping us walk and talk and heal through our traumatic births.
Nicole, what is the definition of a traumatic birth?
Traumatic births can look different for everybody. Because you're in the middle of such an intense experience, moms can have different things that come up from and have come up within the stories that you said today, of worry of injury or death or something happening to themselves or to their baby. And they take that with them after the birth experience, and it just stays with them. But different people can bring, trauma can look different for different people. It can look like regret of how they went ahead with their birth plans. A very beautiful, wonderful birth to one person, to another person may not be that way. They might have certain agreements that were formed either as a child or as an adult over what they think birth should look like going into the birth. And then when it doesn't look that way, that disappointment comes out as being trauma. It could be, an example of that could be that, birth is not painful, and if they experience a painful birth, that could be quite traumatic. Or that, birth is going to be if a full day of labor, and what if their baby comes out, before they make it to the hospital, and what that looks like. So it can look different ways that way. It also can be something more intense like flashbacks or reliving emotional memories or physical memories after the birth, like post-traumatic stress injury. And it also can, the also thing that traumatic birth can do is we engage certain aspects of our neurological, our body, our responses that are like reflexes. And we have a fight, flight, freeze response. Yeah. And I find a lot of people freeze or have these moments of feeling frozen during their birth. And if you go back and you think about your birth and you think about where you may have wished you had yelled out and said no, or yelled out and said, oh, I don't want this, or could you please, or even just moments when you were told not to push and you were ready to push, or where you wish you had gotten up and done something different. And all of these things that we know we want to do with our bodies, somehow we just shove them right back down inside of our bodies, and they kind of stay in there, and they can stay trapped in there. And then over time, they come back up wanting to be released. So those kind of things, that can be traumatic.
Definitely.
That you carry with you.
Well, I totally see that, because after I gave birth, I saw every pregnant woman. I'd be like, that has to come out. And I saw the week after I gave birth, I remember driving on the street and seeing a woman with pushing a stroller and holding a kid's hand. And I'm like, she had one and she decided to have a second. Like, how do you do that? And I actually started to cry. Every time I saw a pregnant woman, I would cry. I got so upset. So how do you move on with your lives? Because you have to now take care of a baby, and I wanted a big family. So now after my first child, I want a big family. I want more children, but I don't want to go through the birth process ever again. So how do you survive that? How do you take care of your babies, plan for more when we're just so emotionally scarred from it?
Well, everybody moves on in different ways, everybody has unique births. There's not, we can create generalizations, but all births are unique, and all postpartum transitions are unique. And just like birth healing is going to be unique to different people, and people find different ways of healing. Some people will heal by writing out their birth story and talking with their friends, and they feel as if they come to a place of healing. For somebody else, they might actually heal through a subsequent birth or not heal through a subsequent birth. Some people, just to get from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, might need medication. And, looking at the whole range of things and experiences, it might be that you need medication to get through the day, or to get through the week, or to get through the month, to the point where you're able to start working through some of the issues that you have, because there's such a range of how people cope. But I think different things that they can do is, first, I invite anybody to have compassion for themselves, and that they start forgiving themselves and looking at what they do well, or what they did well during this experience, and how they do well in their day-to-day, and that you sleep, eat, take care of yourself, reduce stress. They also I think ways of moving through some of this is looking for coping tools. Coping tools that you may have had since you were a child, or coping tools that you've found as an adult, and being mindful, being in the moment, rather than worrying about all of the different things ahead of you, and just work on one thing at a time. And also recognize how these things might affect relationships of people around you, or even bonding with a baby, and looking at ways that you can start renewing that bond. So those are different ways of not necessarily moving on, but moving on through your day-to-day. So, and also I think that it's important, because you mentioned something about the next birth. Just also realizing that in preparing for the next birth, really looking through, really dealing with some of the issues that came up with the past birth, and facing some of those things, and reframing them in a way that you can come into your next birth feeling open to birthing.
Well, Nicole, I have a question for you.
Of course.
My husband wasn't able to attend our daughter's birth because I had to be put under. And even though he won't talk about it, I know that there's some kind of trauma or pain for him regarding the fact that he wasn't able to be part of that process. How do you suggest I deal with that and help him?
Well, I think, first of all, that you're already starting to deal with it and help him, because you're acknowledging the fact that he probably has those feelings. And his experiences, partner's experiences of birth are very different than mother's experiences, even if they're in the birth room with them, going through every single thing at a time. His experiences are also not necessarily being there with you. I mean, partners, when they're in the birth room, have different things, and that the different roles or different hats they play. And even when they're not in the birth room, they have different hats that they wear. So in the birth room, for sure, they are wearing different hats, like their labor support. There's a lot of expectations on partners.
Oh, yeah.
So labor support, protector, supposed to protect the person in the room. They're also supposed to be present for the birth of their baby and the birth of them as a father. So as somebody who wasn't at the birth, there's certain things that they hope they had done to set certain things up. And there's certain things that they have to deal with after the birth has happened, But they still have those certain archetypal roles of supporting their partner. And so there are going to be emotions in regards to where they were there for you and where they may not have been able to be there with you. So I really encourage partners to actually have a separate time to maybe seek out some help and work with their birth story. I don't see men as usually having a group of men to go talk about the birth story with and what they felt.
Sad.
Yes, it is.
No way.
It is. Talk about what they feel like they might have felt inadequate, or they might have felt as if they weren't able to be something that they wanted to be. But I do find that mom's issues with birth are sometimes completely different than what dads are, even if they were in the same room, because they do have different, even as a witness, you have a different experience. And he is a witness in a different way. He is a witness in the sense that he has witnessed things from afar. I don't know if he got updates. I don't know. Sometimes not knowing what's happening can be just as traumatic as knowing what's happening. And so there is so much there to work with within a birth story. And I think that it's nice that people do some work together, but having that work to do it separately so that people can really reveal all of those feelings that they might not reveal to their partner because they don't want to give them more trauma.
Oh, I'm all emotional. No, because exactly that. We spoke with Nicole and she helped walk us through it. And at one point she said, what's the moment that you don't share with anybody when you gloss over, when you tell your birth story? And my moment was completely different than my husband's moment, and hearing that moment, like just hearing you speak, remembering that moment where he felt helpless was so hard for me to hear, So, Nicole, when I was given pamphlets and stuff in the hospital and my checkup saying, do you feel like you want to hurt your baby? Do you feel like you want to do this for all these articles, programs with postpartum depression? And while it's very real, I wasn't suffering from that. So what is the difference between postpartum depression and post-traumatic stress? And I know that there's different people that are qualified to handle each of those. Yeah, well,
and I think it's also important to say that there's something different than what this culture calls baby blues, which could be some a reaction after the endorphins leave, and that moms generally get weepy and feel a little come down after the endorphins from the birth are over and they're settling in. But with postpartum depression, it doesn't have to be that a traumatic birth experience leads into postpartum depression. It just leaves someone more at risk for that. It could be hormones. It could be, right now we're seeing a huge influx of people with thyroid disorders, with Hashimoto's, and that definitely leads towards postpartum depression. Not getting sleep for many nights on end and having a difficult transition with the baby, judgments of yourself as a mother or as over your birth experience. Also, previous trauma. And that leads into post-traumatic stress injuries. With post-traumatic stress injuries, a person is having flashbacks and having recurring memories where they're seeing themselves as powerless or helpless. And sometimes people who have post-traumatic stress injuries have already had a series of traumas in their life that happened before the birth experience. And the birth experience just layers on top of it. So these are they can be quite more extreme as well. So, and healing goes in cycles. You're going to feel like, oh, wow, I feel really healed now. And then a conversation comes up and the tears start flowing. And you realize that you're not quite healed, because that's the way we also learn to protect ourselves, is we just heal a little bit and then we kind of pull back. And then we heal a little bit more and we pull back. And some people may never heal from their birth. They might just carry it with them for the rest of their lives.
Where can women go to share their story to help with the healing process?
Well, I first want to say that I think that sharing stories, and we shared some pretty intense stories here today on the air, it really deserves a sacred space. You know, sharing your birth story deserves a sacred space where you can really be heard and held and loved by the people listening to you. And I think women can get some of that going to like a red tent and telling their birth story at a red tent where people really listen to you. They're not sounding off of you. They're not putting pressure on you. It's just about what do you want to share and how can you flood that out. It's also going to communities of women. It might be your friends. It might be ICANN. It might be people who just are there to just, again, listen to you and love and with openness. But I also want to say that I do something called Birth Story Circle, and there's other birthing from within mentors who do it as well. And we do something called Birth Story Labyrinth. And in doing a Birth Story Labyrinth, it's really having you look back at your birth story and what does it look like? And breaking it down to certain things. Because sometimes our stories become kind of dead. If we look at our old stories, they become like a record on a record player that just browns down all the different layers and gets deeper and deeper. And it's almost like we've memorized a script of how it went. But there's a certain point when stories are still alive. And usually if there's trauma there or difficult stuff there, even for any birth witness, you can go back in and you can see different possibilities of healing within those moments that still exist. And I think those possibilities are quite important within a story. And I think we all can learn to heal by not just storytelling, but also by story listening. We can't change what happened in your births or your birth stories, but we can look back and reframe them.
Thank you, Nicole Morales, for helping us today walk through our pain of a traumatic birth. If you want more information on today's show, Healing After Traumatic Birth, go to our episodes page on our website, parentsavers.com, or you can go visit Nicole's website, artofopening.com. Thanks for being a part of the show. We look forward to the more conversation on our Facebook page and our website. Before we wrap up today's show, here's the latest toy talk.
Hello, Parent Savers. I'm Brian Miller. I own Geppetto's Toys, a specialty toy store chain in San Diego. Thanks for listening. We're going to talk about 2 to 3-year-olds, what 2 to 3-year-olds like to play with. Well, first of all, at that age, you're actually beginning to do some cooperative play, some beginning games, lacing beads, an activity where you can do one-to-one correspondence, such as a counting game or a memory game where you can say 1 and there's 1 apple. 2 apples. Those are great things to do where you can have hand-eye coordination and also that one-to-one correspondence for beginning counting. Cooperative play, things that 2 children can do together. Even if they're doing parallel play side by side, they're both building towers of blocks, for example. That interaction is really, really important. Beginning crafts. It's wonderful for a 2 or 3-year-old to start with a safe craft, something that's non-toxic. Certainly writing with crayons or scribbling with crayons or coloring with crayons are great. There are lots of non-toxic paints available for finger painting, drawing pictures, getting messy. That's the fun, is exploring the texture and the color and how the colors mix together. So all of those things are beginning art activities, great for a 3-year-old to play with. You can visit our website, Geppetto'sToys.com, for more ideas, or also please listen to Parent Savers for more toy tips in the future.
That wraps up today's show. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions for our experts about today's show or the topics we discussed, call our Parent Savers hotline at 619-866-4775 or send us an email through our website, parentsavers.com, or Facebook page, and we'll answer your question in an upcoming episode. Coming up next week, we're talking about the dirty on diapers and discussing all of our diapering options. Thanks for listening to Parent Savers, empowering new parents everywhere.
This has been a New Mommy Media production. The information and material contained in this episode are presented for educational purposes only. Statements and opinions expressed in this episode are not necessarily those of New Mommy Media and should not be considered facts. While such information and materials are believed to be accurate, it is not intended to replace or substitute for professional medical advice or care, and should not be used for diagnosing or treating healthcare problem or disease or prescribing any medication. If you have questions or concerns regarding your physical or mental health or the health of your baby, please seek assistance from a qualified healthcare provider.